Hello friends, welcome back to our yet another tutorial where I am going to be exploring attributes. In the previous videos we have used a few attributes. What is an attribute? An HTML attribute is used to add additional information about an HTML element. It is important to remember that attributes are used or are typed or are found in the HTML text, and they are used in the start tag. You write an attribute or you add an attribute to an element using the start tag. You do not write it in the end tag or the closing tag, but you write the attributes in the opening or start tag. HTML elements can have multiple attributes. We have seen, for example, here in our link element, we have used the type attribute, we have used the rel attribute, we have used the href attribute. These are attributes. They are adding more information about this particular element. This one says the type of this of the file that you want to link to is a CSS file, and then the relationship of this file with our index file is a style sheet, and the href element tells us where to find the particular file. It gives us the path to the CSS file. So this element is taking several attributes, 3 attributes, and then we have got our input element here, which takes also the type attribute, it also takes the name attribute, it also takes the ID attribute, it also takes the value attribute. You can also include as many other attributes, for example the placeholder attribute. There are so many attributes that you can include in an element depending with the element that you are working with. So the structure of an HTML attribute, we have got the attribute name, an equal sign, as you can see, and a value of that particular attribute. So they go in name value pairs. They are composed of a name value pair. All of them, they are written like this: type, name, and a value. The value is text. Type is the name of the attribute, text is the value. So we're assigning this value to this attribute using this equal sign. Okay. There are some attributes that can be used on all HTML elements. You can use them anyway. But for example, I cannot come to a paragraph as an element and say type. You see, this type can only be used to a few, for example, the input element, but I can use the ID element anyway on the ID attribute on any element that I want to refer to. I can use the class attribute on any element that I want to refer to. So these attributes can be used. They are global attributes because they can be used on any element that we are going to want to refer to. And then we're going to move on now and demonstrate the use of some attributes. I'm going to demonstrate the use of the style attribute so that I also talk about embedded CSS, embedded styling. So where we are going to be, we have seen other attributes so far. Then I want to use a style sheet, an embedded style sheet, or an inline style sheet, I mean, using, since we have used before an external style sheet, I'm now going to show you another attribute that you can use so that we can style our text inside an element. We are going to use the style attribute. in this heading 4, style equals value. This is the name of the attribute, and equals sign, and then the value of the attribute. The value for the style attribute, it takes the CSS syntax. It takes a declaration of a CSS, the way we want to style our particular. I just want to change the color of heading 4, and I also want to do something to heading 4. That's something that we are going to see a difference between what is happening. Okay, so now I'm going to just say color it is taking the same syntax, although it doesn't have the curly braces, but we are using the same syntax. I'm just going to make this one blue, and then I'm going to add another styling to our heading. I'm just going to say I want to transform. Okay, text transform. Okay, and then say uppercase. Let's just reload our browser and see the changes that are going to take place. If you notice, I've added two things. I've styled this heading 4 using two CSS styles. I've changed the color to blue. I've also transformed the text so that it becomes uppercase. As you can see, heading 4 is now blue, and it is also in uppercase. This is called inline CSS or inline styling. We are actually writing our CSS on the particular element, which is actually not recommended, because HTML is basically only meant for coming up or designing the structure of our page. It is only meant for coming up with the structure of our page. This styling should be done by the CSS, so it is not recommended for you to style your content using the HTML file. But I just wanted to demonstrate how an attribute can be used. Although we have been using attributes at the top there, but I just wanted to give you more on attributes. And then the other attributes that we are going to end with, we have two attributes that can be used on any element, and they are global. We have got the ID attribute, and we also have the class attribute. An ID, I want to talk about an ID before I talk about a class. Right? An ID is used to identify an element. An ID is used to identify an element. Just for example, just like us human beings, we have our IDs. My ID number is different from another person's ID number. Why? Because that ID has got some features that only identify myself, that only identify me. So it is like a fingerprint. So if you use an ID on one element, you can never use the same ID on another element, because you are making them equal. Even twins, they have different IDs in the real world. But so you cannot use an ID more than once in an element, in a different element. If you have a paragraph with an ID, you cannot have another paragraph with the same ID. So I'm just going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about that ID and demonstrate how it works. Okay, now I want to add an attribute. Let me add an attribute to h1, the ID attribute. ID is h1. This is my ID. It's an attribute. I'm using this attribute to only identify this h1. I'm just going to demonstrate how I can refer to this attribute, to this h1, using the h1 attribute. Let me just not say h1. Let me say heading 1 in full. Right. I want to refer to this heading 1 using this attribute. As you can see in my example here, I have referred to heading 2 using an element, a tag name. Now I want to use an element, an attribute. For example, when you are referring to an ID, you start by typing the hashtag. Remember, we are in a CSS file here, and then we are in a CSS file. The attribute is written just like this in my text editor, in my HTML file. But when I'm referring to this particular ID in my CSS, I'm going to first type the hashtag and then type my declaration. So what I'm going to do to the h1 element, I'm just going to underline text decoration, I'm going to underline using a double line. Let's just reload. Oops. Okay. Reload. What happened to my other h1? Oops. Okay, let me just do something. What have I done? Okay, now we have underlined the heading 1. Where's my other heading? Let me see. Oh, okay. I removed my heading. I just want to include another heading 1. h1. Hello world. Right. I want you to notice something. Let me just refer to my h1 again and say color green, and then reload my browser. You are not going to notice that I've got this CSS declaration here, and I have actually changed the color of my heading 1 using a tag name, and both elements with h1 tag have been changed to green. However, I also have got this h1 which is underlined. It is underlined because I referred to it using the ID that I had included as an attribute to my h1. This ID is not included on this one. Yes, if we include the same ID to that other paragraph, to that other heading, it's going to work. However, it is violating the standards of the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortia. It is violating the standards, and it is going to affect your SEO ranking on Google. So it is important that when you use an ID, you use it only once. When you use an ID, it's important that you use it only once. Just want to check something. When you use an ID, make sure that you use it only once so that it doesn't affect your SEO ranking, search engine optimization, so your Google ranking. So I'm going to just remove this ID because this is not something that you should be doing. Right. However, if you want to use the same attribute to refer to apply the same styling to various components or to various elements in your HTML file, you are going to use a class. For example, I'm going to say I want all my headings to be in uppercase. I want all my headings to be in uppercase. You are going to add. We are going to put them in their own class, to group them together. Classes are used for grouping elements together. So if you want to apply the same styling to various elements, you are going to group them using the class attribute. They are in the same class, so they are going to get the same styling. So the class attribute that I'm going to use is that I'm just going to say headings. All my headings are going to have this class. Let me just copy and paste this class to all my headings. As you can see, I've got an ID. I also have a class in the same particular element. And you should notice also that I'm writing my attributes in the start tag. I'm writing my attributes in the start tag. And you notice that an element can have more than one attributes. An element can have more than one attribute, and I am writing my attributes in the start tag. I'm emphasizing that so that you do not forget. So now I'm going to format my headings. Now, whenever I'm referring to a class, I'm going to start with a period. Then I write the name of the class. Then curly braces. Then I can write my styling. So I'm just going to change the text transform property so that I set it to uppercase. Then when I set it to uppercase, all my headings are going to be in uppercase. As you can notice that the class has been applied to all the elements that have got that particular class on it. This is how you deal with the attributes in HTML. These attributes, especially the class attribute, the element, the tag, the class attribute, and the ID attributes, are mostly used when you are dealing with JavaScript. When you are writing your scripts for your website, you are going to be selecting these elements using the IDs, the tags, or the classes. So it is used for that particular purpose. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to share, subscribe, and like this video, as I'm going to be unpacking more elements in the future videos. Please stay with us, and you are going to learn a lot. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now. See you in the next video.